So up next, I'm going to have Sandra Gray come up, and she is going to introduce our keynote speaker, Dinah Pulver. Thank you.
Welcome again. This gathering does not need to be reminded of how important good, active, slow closer. Okay. How important investigative, active, accurate reporting is. The notable events, and some of you can remember, being identified by the journalists who covered them. And some of you may be old enough to remember Edward R. Murrow. I don't know. Or Walter Cronkite from Vietnam. If you're old enough to remember the voice of Edward R. Murrow from London, or hearing Walter Cronkite from Vietnam, when it comes to environmental issues, we need to look no further than the sixth-generation daughter of Florida, Dinah Pulver. Longtime writer for the Daytona Beach News Journal, Dinah has been promoted to become the first national environmental data writer for Gatehouse Media. She will be working on the National Investigations Team, doing what she does so well, now on the national level. She is a four-time recipient of the Waldo Profit Award for Excellence in Environmental Journalism. She received a gold medal for public service and a first place in the explanatory reporting for a 5-part series on Florida's water woes. She is recognized by the National Audubon Society and the Florida Wildlife Foundation as a communicator of the year. It is vital that the environment of our state and our nation have an advocate like Dinah Pulver. We are indeed fortunate to have her speak for the environment. Her voice may very well help to save our state, our nation, and ultimately our planet. It's a very special privilege to have her as our keynote speaker today. Please welcome Dinah Pulver.
I cry at the drop of a hat. It doesn't take a lot. Okay, well, thanks for coming. It's good to see such a great crowd here. I need to make, where's my clicker? This is my clicker. I almost forgot that. Okay, we'll see if it works. I have to point it to this computer, right? Well, thanks for being here. It's good to see such a crowd. And get ready to rock and roll, because I always over-prepare. And I talk really fast, so I have to have a lot of material. So then I get a lot of material, and then I get started, and I'm like, oh, well, let's talk some more about this. So we'll just kind of rip through this over the next 45 minutes or so. And then there will be time for questions at the end. And it's great to see so many people. It's great to see so many people here that I know. It's a reminder of how much I'm going to miss not covering my community. And it's been very nerve-wracking. I've been in the new job for about 6 weeks. It's going to be great. I love it. But it's hard to say so long to so many of the local issues that I've come to care about. Okay, there we are. So this is one of my childhood favorites from remember those blue Bible stories? We had a set of those blue Bible stories, and there was a picture like this of Moses parting the Red Sea. And the story I have loved the story. I've always loved the story, and I especially love the story after I read a story in the Washington Post about how it scientifically could happen. So I love it whenever these miracles can be kind of explained by God working through the natural science of the world. So I love that. So Moses is out there with the children of Israel, and they've got this crisis, and they have to solve it. So Moses parts the Red Sea, and they walk through on dry land. That's the story, right? So now we are faced with all these issues, and our challenge is to be like the children of Israel and to solve this crisis before us, right? So there's a lot involved in that, and there's a lot at stake. This thing is just going to drive me crazy. Okay. Oh, well, I'm pushing the left side. I think maybe that's the deal. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the issues and the solutions and the challenges that are facing us, right? So we have a lot of all of those. Okay, go ahead. You're going to have to watch me if you're going to do it for me, because it's not working. So this is one of my favorite pictures of Florida. This is, you can see all the water that we have. We're surrounded by water. We have all kinds of water. We have the ocean. You know, why is this clicker not working? Okay, we have oceans, we have lakes, we have estuaries. Okay, so there we are. That's all of our issues. drinking water, estuaries, rivers, lakes, springs. We have all these things. We're so blessed. We're surrounded by water, and we use it in so many different ways. I was reminded of that when I went up in the blimp. When I was up in the blimp, and you can see water over Volusia County. Everywhere you look, there's water. There's water everywhere. We're so blessed to have so much water.
Get the black button on this? One of those buttons makes it go black.
That's what I'm doing. Okay, so these are examples from places where we're using the water. This is in Oak Hill. There's nothing, to me, one of the prettiest places in the county. One of the prettiest places in the county is Oak Hill. Oak Hill is beautiful down there it's just truly incredibly beautiful. This is my grandchildren at a splash park. They're enjoying the water. DeLeon Springs. How many of you have been to DeLeon Springs? The kids, people love it. I mean, people love it. And people swim there year round. We're so blessed with DeLeon Springs and Blue Springs and Green Springs and go ahead, manatees. But we have these issues. So we have all these waterways that we enjoy, we spend time at, we swim, we hike, but there are issues in almost every waterway. Almost every waterway in Volusia County has some kind of issue. The Indian River Lagoon system, I'm sure you've read stories about the murky water, the brown algae blooms, the fish die-offs, manatee die-offs, pelican die-offs. 2011, 2012, a lot of problems there in the lagoon, and those problems continue. They still have trouble with the algal blooms in the lagoon. They haven't been able to get them to stop. So that's, people have questioned if the lagoon is at a tipping point. And then this spring, we had algae show up, toxic blue-green algae show up in the springs in the St. Johns River system. The algae showed up at Silver Glen Springs. And then even at Blue Springs, and the fish at Blue Spring had weird fungi on them, which kind of upset a lot of people for good reason. The oceans aren't exempt either. We have all these problems in the ocean with the massive seaweed. We have one of the professors, Brian LaPointe from Harbor Branch, concluded that a system of a current in the Atlantic Ocean might be contributing to the problems, the nutrient that's feeding these seaweed blooms that we have and that are showing up all along the coast of Florida, which adds to existing problems that we already had, because the massive seaweed can contribute its own nutrients to the environment. And then, well, I am so embarrassed. I am so sorry. I don't know what my issue is with this clicker. I am pointing and I'm pressing that little arrow. I don't know what the issue is. My fingers aren't that big. I don't know. So there are many causes for all these issues, and I'm flustered and I'm sorry. Okay, so in a neighborhood, and many of you know this, we're in a neighborhood, we have our businesses, we have all these places that we shop, and so there's always different problems that we all contribute to. I mean, we all contribute to these problems. There's the runoff from the streets and where that runoff goes, and what happens in our yards and what happens in our septic tanks. And when I first got married, my husband would change the oil and the antifreeze in our car and just dump it on the ground. And I mean, that wasn't that long ago. We have done a lot of really stupid things to the environment over the years. And the idea now, right, is that we're supposed to be getting better, we're supposed to be improving, but all these things are really, it takes an environmental ethic, and it also takes a lot of money. And that's one of the big challenges going forward, is the money that's involved. The St. Johns River Water Management District, other water districts, DEP, a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time and money trying to figure out what is wrong, what are the problems in the water, and how can they be solved. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's this or oh, it's that, and they question, but in reality, there is no one thing that's causing all of our issues with water. It is a broad array of things that are happening to our water. And it's something that we all have to take responsibility for and have a role in fixing. But at Blue Spring, the septic tanks, they concluded in the priority focus area, septic tanks contributed 54% of the problem of the nitrates that are found in the water at Blue Spring. And that's because of people like me who live in the Blue Spring, or in the spring. I live in the Gemini Springs priority focus area, but there are people who live in the Blue Spring focus area, and things that we put into our septic tank drain field. If you live near a spring, the water, everybody knows how water flows, right? It flows toward these springs, and so the things that I'm putting in my septic tank, maybe the reason why I can't swim at Gemini Springs like I used to. Here's other things. 28% of the problem is fertilizer, 12% is wastewater, 5% is atmospheric deposition, which comes also from some of that can come from human activities, and then livestock waste is 1%, which that's the she mentioned this big series. Somebody mentioned, we were talking about earlier today. I did this big series in June on septic tanks. And there are 2.7 million septic tanks in Florida, which is a lot when you consider that it's like 15% of the septic tanks in the entire nation. So across the nation, 15% of the septic tanks belong to Florida, and we live on a karst foundation. We're Swiss cheese underneath the ground. So, and a lot of the septic tanks are in places like DeBerry, where we live on top of each other. And, and Jason Evans from Stetson put it so eloquently in my story, we're drinking our poop in DeBerry. Because literally, I've got a septic tank and like 60 feet away is my well, so it's all going to the same place and all coming from the same place. Now, there's a little filtration. I might be exaggerating a little, but you get my point. It's something that we all have to be thinking about. And then, something else that's come up is like, so what happens when they pump a septic tank? Where does that go? So, that's another area where there's been some legislation, there are some things happening because, ultimately in Florida, part of the problem, to me, is all the waste that we create. When you consider what goes to the landfill, and when you consider what goes to the, through your septic tank and to this municipal wastewater plant, and I think the average person uses something like, I think minimum is 60 gallons of water a day that you use. And if you multiply that times 20 million people who live in Florida, imagine how much wastewater that is. Every day, that kind of wastewater is funneling through some system, whether it's the septic tank or the municipal wastewater treatment plant, or whether it's the biosludge coming from those plants. That's a lot of people in a very small amount of area with a lot of wastewater. This is a stormwater pipe that was flowing directly into Mosquito Lagoon. That, stormwater pipes, I think there's a lot of movement, and certainly in the Mosquito Lagoon Reasonable Assurance Plan, one of the things they want to go after is this stormwater, these old stormwater pipes that still discharge right into, years ago, and when people were developing Florida, you just to get rid of whatever it is, you just put a pipe down and make it go somewhere else, out of sight, out of mind. Well, now, those things have come home to roost, and so we got to go back and fix some of these old problems. And so there's been a lot of effort, I think, to identify these stormwater pipes and figure out how we can stop putting things in those stormwater pipes. And I still, even though this has been an issue probably for most of the years I've been a reporter, I still see people in their little lawn trucks going out there blowing the leaves into the storm gutters. Even though a lot of the storm gutters even have those stickers on them, people are still channeling things down those sewer pipes. So it's just the storm gutters. It's kind of funny. Another issue everybody's talked about, fertilizers. If you live in one of those subdivisions where you are required to have a beautiful green lawn, some people really feel like they need to put a lot of fertilizer in there to make it be green. And there's research now, more and more research all the time, that I think will help people understand that they don't have to use as much, they can use less. And something else that comes up, and I'll mention agriculture a couple of times. A lot of times agriculture takes the heat from people because they're like, oh, the farmers. But I will tell you that most farmers will not use any more fertilizer than they have to because it's really expensive. I mean, if you're looking at the $15 a bag you're spending for Scott's on your lawn and multiply that times the many thousands of acres that some of the farmers are fertilizing, most of them are very conservation minded. Water use, I don't even, in the rest of my slides, I hardly even go into water use, but water use has been a big factor. There's, it's funny, every time I go to my sister's house, she lives way out in the woods in a rural county in Florida. These kind of issues really haven't touched them yet. And she will turn the water on and do things all over her kitchen with the water running. And I realized how much of an environmental ethic I've managed to acquire through my 28 years, because she laughs at me because I will go around behind her and shut the water off because I just can't, I'm spazzing out that she's just letting the water run. It's pretty funny. So there's a lot of water use. And then I should have saved my wastewater part. Here's the wastewater treatment plant down in southwest Volusia, where the cities and Volusia have worked with Volusia County to try to come up with a more advanced wastewater treatment. There's a lot of attention being put on advanced wastewater treatment. There are a few people out in the community who have complained about how much it costs. That it might be expensive to come up with these better ways to treat our wastewater, but at what cost if we don't do it? That's one of the questions that has to be answered. Here's the city of Daytona Beach. This is an old headline. This is from 2016, but they've had virtually some of the same headlines over the last couple of weeks. When they get a lot of rain, Daytona Beach, they have problems with the wastewater treatment plants. Now, this is happening all over the state. I had looked up the numbers the other day. There have been thousands of reported wastewater releases in Florida this year. Thousands. And hundreds of them in October when the storm came through. Every time there's a lot of rain, we have problems with these wastewater treatment plants releasing either fully treated or partially treated or completely untreated wastewater into rivers and streams all over the state. So that's another issue where it's going to require huge expenditures to try to bring these municipal wastewater systems online to be able to handle these things when we get these hurricanes and rain backups that cause these massive releases of stuff that just doesn't need to be in the water. So how can we solve these issues, right? And that to me is I think one of the things that we all have to take a part in. We all have to take some responsibility for the blame and for the action and to figure out how we're going to pay for it all. Because there was a study by the legislature a couple of years ago where they kind of put a price tag at like $20 billion to solve Florida's water problems. And, I'm not forking over $1 million for that. It's got something we all have to figure out how to pay for. And there really aren't easy answers. It's easy to stand here and say, oh, we have all these problems and they all need to be fixed. But in reality, there's a lot of other problems in Florida as well. So it's going to kind of take a concerted long-term effort with people who are committed to solving the problems. That's Blue Spring. It's one of my favorite pictures of Blue Spring. Okay, so the first thing to me is individual effort, personal responsibility. It's something I've tried to teach my kids that, to think about what you're putting down the drain, to turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth, to turn the water off when you're doing the dishes. Some of that are things that we just all need to consider, that we're one of the 21 million people living in Florida who are putting stuff down into the aquifer. So we need to be, if we want to swim in the springs, and if I want my grandchildren to be able to swim in a spring or to swim in the ocean, or to be able to eat fish out of the St. Johns River, I want them all to understand that they have to take some personal responsibility for that. And I think as grandparents and parents, we need to be talking to our kids and to our neighbors. I've talked to my neighbor about fertilizer and watering the lawn 5 times a week because, I'm like, I teased her. I call her yard swamp ball because it's so wet. You have to put on my waders to go to my neighbor's house. And so I've kind of teased her and doing it in a loving fashion, but I think it's good to just help people remember, what needs to be done. And also it takes a group effort. So there's things that we have to band together. There's things that we have to work on together. Some of you are involved in group efforts right now but we need more people. More people have to be involved in getting together and working on solutions, compromise and working towards solutions that can move us forward. And instead of battling each other, there's a lot of divisiveness that kind of drives me a little bonkers. I'm borrowing a quote. There's been this long-held quote that is really great about, for some reason this isn't coming out the right way, There's this quote, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, right? Well, to me, I looked it up, and the original quote was, the condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance. And I thought, well, we could really turn that quote around, and it could be, the condition upon which God hath given water to man is eternal vigilance. So if we want to protect our water, it's going to require vigilance on all of our parts. I mean, vigilance is the thing to keep track of what's happening. Ultimately, this is the water. This is a picture of the Florida aquifer, and that's what lies beneath all of us. We all contribute. All of us have little pipes sticking down in that aquifer where we're getting our water. So, of course, the first thing I'm going to do is plug newspapers, right? Because how can you stay informed about what's happening in your community if you're reading the newspaper? And so few people read the newspaper, that newspapers across the country, I mean, for a lot of reasons. Certainly there's another complicated issue. For a lot of reasons, a lot of newspapers have cut staff, reduced staff. But newspapers are important. Local news outlets are really important because that's how people get the information. Those reporters who are out there slogging through these long agendas and sitting through long meetings to try to bring you the truth of what's happening. And if people do not read and support local news, local newspapers, that thing kind of dries up, and then people, I don't know what they'll share on Facebook, because they'll just be sharing stories that don't have, responsible journalists behind them. This is an issue that came up in DeBerry a few years ago, and it came from the newspaper. There's a local civic group who monitors meetings around the state, around our county. This person had been going to the meetings, and this person was completely shocked to find out that this issue was going on in DeBerry. They'd never even heard about it, even though they'd been going to the meetings. But I knew, because I was looking at an agenda, and I saw a piece of stationery that I recognized, and I went, aha, I know that bright green letterhead. There's something going on here. And sure enough, it ended up being a really big deal in DeBerry. Residents of the city got involved. They did a big protest walk, and they were able to save this piece of land down in DeBerry that surrounds Gemini Springs and avoid some kind of interesting deals going on with that. And that was because somebody cared. That was because a lady named Mary Sue Scott in DeBerry got out and got involved, and they got a lot more people involved. And this guy here is This is a guy from Travis, from Spring Hunters, and I've often wondered, we've used this photo in the paper so many times, and I wondered when he was slaving over that poster at his house the night before, if he realized this poster was going to live in infamy. So now I look at protest signs now and I think about that. I'm like, I wonder if people think about that when they're making those signs, how many times that picture may go around the world. If you're informed about where you live, this is the priority Springs focus areas. So my house is down there in that blue for Gemini Springs. A lot of people, even the people in Deltona, are in Blue Spring. If you talk to people in Deltona, many of them will say there's no way. They don't believe there's any way. But if you stand on the top of a hill at Lyonia Preserve and look around, you can see the ground slopes away. If you camp in a high spot anywhere in West Volusia, you can kind of see where those ancient oceans kind of sloped away, and you can see where the water would make sense that it would flow downhill toward these springs that we have in our county. So it's important to understand your area, where you live. If you live in Ormond by the Sea, if you live in New Smyrna Beach, if you live in Oak Hill, if you understand your community and you understand the issues in your community, you can do things, and you can talk to your neighbors and help your neighbors understand what the issues are. Sorry. Okay, so one of my things is you can vote, and I think that voting is really important. I wouldn't want to tell anybody how to vote, because I feel like everybody, we all have different things that are important to us. So the important thing is to know your candidates, to get out there and really understand who they are and talk to these people. I realized a few years ago that I knew everybody I was voting for on the ballot except one national race, and there was one of the candidates I hadn't met. Now, I'm fortunate because as a journalist I get to meet a lot of people, but even before I was a journalist, I would go to these chamber forums. So one of the first things I did when we moved to DeBerry is I went to a DeLand Chamber forum out there in front of the courthouse, and I met all the people who were running for office. And I feel like if you meet people and you talk to them, and then you understand where they're coming from, then that if it's your issue, you know how that person feels, or you tell that person how important it is to you, and they may get a look at something that they didn't know before. And I really can't stress how important I think it is to be able to get out and meet the people, talk to them, make sure they understand what's important to you. And then once they get elected, you know them, right? You talk to them, you've seen them, you go up, you talk to them again, and when there's an issue that comes up on an agenda, and this is one of the things that I think oftentimes people really don't understand. They'll get upset about an issue, they'll show up at a county council meeting, and they'll be sitting out there in their matching t-shirts or their posters in a county council meeting and hoping that they'll change the mind of the elected official. And I think it's way more important to call these officials up on the phone as soon as you find out about an issue. Don't wait till the day it's going to be on the agenda or even the day before the agenda. As soon as you find out about an issue, call these people up on the phone. Offer to meet with them, talk to them, let them know, send them a letter, not just a form email. Let people know how you feel about an issue, because you can really affect change if you can sit down and have a conversation with someone to help them convince them why this is important. That, to me, that's the kind of change I've seen, is when the people who work behind the scenes often get things because they're out there working behind the scenes. And you don't have to work behind the scenes, but you certainly have to work at knowing your elected officials, making sure that you can have a relationship with them and get them to focus on the things that you think are important. And when there's so many, when an elected official sits down behind the dais, say a county councilman for a day, their agenda is full of dozens of items that are important to someone. I mean, they're on the agenda because they matter to somebody. So you can't, it's hard, I think, sometimes to get them to focus on a few issues or to convince them what's the highest priority. But they do pay more attention to the things that they're hearing from people. So if they're hearing from you, then they're like, oh, maybe I should take a look at this. And that's how things happen, and that's how change is affected, and by demanding action. I mean, you don't have to look any further than the last election cycle in Florida that there were a lot of politicians who made water a big issue. On both sides of the aisle last year, water became a huge issue, and it's because I think finally all those photos of those dead fish lined up along the beaches in Florida made people go, oh, wait, maybe our water is important to our economy. I mean, how long did it take for people to figure that out, right? But there was a huge uprising last year of people who really wanted their politicians, elected officials to understand that our economy depends on water in Florida. There's most things in Florida that we do require clean water. I mean, swimming, boating, fishing, all those reasons that people have been coming to Miami Beach since the 1920s. I mean, I don't think my ancestors in 1809 came to Florida for the water. They were just coming to Florida. But most everybody since the 1900s, they were coming to Florida because they had a fish camp that they liked, or because they wanted to, live near the beach. And water matters to us. It's really important. It's important that even to some huge corporate employer who is considering coming to Florida, do you think they really want to move here if they're seeing these massive headlines about, red tide algae making impossible to people to breathe? No. I mean, these things matter to our health and to the companies that we attract and to the recreation that we do. And so I think that's been a big key, is for people to really kind of go, no, we're not going to just sit by and take this anymore. I don't mean to sound like a rabble-rouser. There's only one time when I was a rabble-rouser, and I'll tell this little story. It's kind of, to me, it's funny. A few years ago, I spoke to the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Club was concerned about speeding cars on the loops. Well, there's this great scene in Miracle on 34th Street where they're trying to figure out what to do about Santa Claus. And so they bagged up all that mail, all those letters to Santa Claus, and then they hauled him into the courtroom, and I said, here's what you do. You get all that roadkill off the loop, put him in your freezers, freeze all those animals, and then haul them over to the county council office and just spread them out in front of the dais. Well, they never did that. I was so disappointed. I thought that was such a great photo op, right? But I never, so maybe someday somebody will take my idea. I just think that, but you gotta let the media know, because that'd be really awesome. So, okay. So there's been an issue with septic tanks. I wrote that big series about septic tanks, and I got really discouraged when I wrote the story about septic tanks, because there were people who got really upset with me over the septic tank issue, and I even got a letter from an environmentalist in the county who said, why are you writing about septic tanks? You need to be writing about plastic. It's like, and then we've had a lot of backlash, because there are people out in the community who say, Septic tanks aren't the issue. We don't need to be spending money on septic tanks. And I'm telling you, some of the brightest minds in the state agree that septic tanks are an issue. Now, they may not be the only issue, but they are definitely an issue in some areas more than others. So it doesn't have to be all the septic tanks. They're not going to come after every septic tank in Deltona and DeBerry, or in Ormond by the Sea. But there are certain septic tanks where they're a problem. I mean, in DeBerry and the Pacton areas where we live, I don't know how anybody could reasonably argue that septic tanks aren't a problem whenever my neighbor's septic tank is 65 feet in one direction and my septic tank is 70 feet in the other. So it doesn't have to be all the septic tanks, but there has to be some focus on septic tanks because they are definitely a part of the problem, and most scientists would agree with that. And there are many areas in Florida where septic tanks are fine. The septic tank contractors, they really want people to understand that we're not talking about banning septic tanks. We're talking about getting better septic tanks and putting septic tanks where they belong and putting municipal wastewater where it can be the most beneficial. One of the other things I'd like to talk about is to stay aware of the issues that are going on in your community. And here's one. This is the Blue Spring Borrow Pit project. And there are utilities involved with this and the St. John's Water Management District. And it may be a great, wonderful idea to take this giant borrow pit and start pumping all the stormwater there so it can percolate down into Blue Spring. But it's also an issue where we have had some responsible scientists in Florida say, watch it closely. Make sure that everybody's doing the research and that people are paying attention so that if issues crop up, something can be done. And it's better to figure this out on the front end, right? To know for sure that you're going at it and they're using sound science so that they're not pumping all that water down there and having some crisis happen just a quarter of a mile away from Blue Spring. My clicker, there we go. It could be great for Blue Spring. It may, they want to recharge the aquifer. The spring flow at Blue Spring had declined for years. Over a 10-year process, it's one of the longest processes, I think, across the state for trying to put in a new minimum flow. They finally came up with a minimum flow for Blue Spring several years ago. But it's been hard to restore the spring water back to the point where they want it to be, back to the high flow that was approved in the MFL, and that's for manatees. They want to have a good spring flow in Blue Spring to protect the manatees, but you also have to remember that that Blue Spring is very closely tied to what happens with our drinking water. So the idea of putting the wastewater down there, this treated wastewater, letting it filter through planted wetlands to further filter the water, is that it will improve the flow to Blue Spring. So there's a very good, righteous goal behind the project. It's just there are people who have questions and want to make sure that the science is being done regarding that. And it was funny because the Water Management District's executive director was at a meeting, and I wrote this quote down for posterity because it's one of those things where when you're as a journalist, things happen and then years later people go back and they're like, can you flip, there we go. She said, I want to assure you that the technology for aquifer recharge and cleaning the water through wetlands are proven techniques. This is not some kind of experiment, but it sort of is an experiment because they said they're going to be doing all. So the first thing they're going to be doing over the first year is looking at the science. They're going to be assessing the science, and so I think that they will probably completely cross all their T's and dot all their I's, and they'll know that it's safe before they start. But sometimes in Florida, we've had projects where people were firmly convinced it was the right thing to do, and later they're like, oops. My father was a dredge operator that helped channel the Kissimmee River. And I don't think when my father was channeling the Kissimmee River that that anybody was thinking, we're going to have to go back and spend $1 billion in 40 years making this right. So we have a tendency sometimes in Florida to do things that may not necessarily be as sure as we thought they were. So holy cow, 5 minutes? Okay, so a couple of weeks after that happened, this clicker, a couple of weeks after that happened, they had to shut down a similar recharge park in Ocala because there were some sinkholes that opened up. So I guess it was good for us that happened because it kind of said, oh yeah, we need to be paying attention to this, and they're gonna. I think they may already have fixed the problems, but it's just an example of how you can start out doing something thinking you're doing the right thing, and then you find out later, well, maybe it really wasn't the right thing. And this is another issue that somebody should be paying attention to. The county spent $28 million on a Leffler Ranch out in Osteen. And now the county's got going to be doing things with that property out there regarding water. It was originally, there was going to be a reservoir, there was going to be stormwater out there, and I'm not sure what the process of that is, but one of the first things that's going to happen is they're going to put wells out there to withdraw groundwater. So it's another issue I think in West Volusia people should be paying attention to. We had a couple of slides on water use. Our water use in general has been, it goes up and down based on whether there's droughts or not going on, but water use has kind of been going along sort of flat. There hasn't been, even though we've had a big population increase, we haven't had a big increase in water, so people are conserving. So if you're one of those people who showers once a week, you know that you're contributing to the good water use in Florida. And my husband, he would love to just take a shower once a week, I think sometimes. I have to remind him all the time. The ag water use, this is another instance where people, sometimes agriculture gets a bad rap. But if you look at the St. Johns River Water Management District's efforts with agriculture water use, they've been working with farmers across the district for 30 years. And the ag water use has dropped significantly and continues to stay pretty low. So there have been some great strides in that area, and I think it's worth noting. There are almost 24 bills already approved, proposed for the next legislative session. If you're interested in finding something to do, tracking bills on the state legislative website is another fun thing to do. You can keep an eye on what they're planning to do. The battle over water and public health returns to Tallahassee. So there's always going to be battles in Tallahassee, but it's good if someone's paying attention and trying to weigh in on what's happening with that. And so I wanted to say one little thing, and this is kind of there are a lot of special interest groups in Florida. We're all part of some kind of special interest group, right? We have a lot of them, and we have a lot of people who are working, different little groups working on different things, and it's good to have all these groups, but it's also good sometimes to kind of, whenever you're hearing about an issue, question the motives of the organization. Especially in South Florida, there are a lot of organizations working on the Everglades and South Florida water issues, and some of them may seem like they're the most wholesome organization in the world, but they're being driven by special interests who have very definite agendas. And even some of the national environmental issues, there are very wealthy, influential people driving these issues, and you may think it's the most pure intent in the world, and it really isn't. I mean, they have their own agenda for things that they want to push. So you just have to be kind of scientific in what you do and pay attention to the kinds of things that you're reading and question. See, and as a journalist, I guess I'm telling you kind of be a journalist. I question everything. I'm skeptical of everybody, and I think I've kind of always been that way, but I want to know what's driving people, what their interests are. And you have to remember that organizations in Florida, or any special organization, they have an interest in fundraising, right? I mean, if it's an organization that's trying to grow its staff, and they've got to maintain an executive director and a public information officer and an attorney and 2 or 3 other people, they all have reasons for doing what they do. So it's just one of those things where I think that sometimes we don't work together. I've seen environmental groups on the Indian River Lagoon system where I had people who belong to those groups calling me up on the phone to trash the other group, even though the group was doing something, and they were like undermining each other at the state legislators because they were fighting for funding. And that kind of thing isn't productive. If groups are fighting amongst themselves for funding, if they're arguing over where to spend the Amendment 1 money, and they're not presenting a united front to the legislature about where they want that money spent, all of that can detract from us moving forward. And if Floridians are going to move forward, if we're going to solve these issues, people need to be moving forward together instead of being so divisive. And that's a national issue, really, right? I mean, there's so much divisive nature today, and it's so much important for us to try to see each other's side and figure out how to compromise and move forward, because that's the way we will be able to solve these issues, is if we're moving forward in the same direction, convincing people to work together and make these things happen. And I believe it can be done. We've made strides. 40 years ago, we forget that they were pumping raw wastewater into Lake Monroe. I mean, that's just what you did with wastewater. So we're far away from that. There are different problems, but I do think they can be moved together if we're all doing our part to stay informed, working together, and trying hard to resolve these issues. So that's about all I have to say today. Oh my gosh, I forgot the main thing I wanted to do today. Okay, so you saw people coming up and dropping all this stuff, right? So we have mosquito spray, we have Miracle Grow, we have antibiotics, we have Coke, caffeine. Now if I pour this bottle of water into this brandy snifter, who will come up and have some? Anybody want to come share water with me? For 2 decades or more, we've known that all these things are present in spring water. For scientists from the University of Florida and other places have tested the water, and birth control hormones, DEET, caffeine, all these things are present in almost every spring in Florida. And it's been a long time. I mean, 20 years people have known. But my medical doctor, our primary care doctor in Orange City, we talked to him a few months ago during a visit. He had no idea these kinds of things were in the water. He said, "You're kidding me. There's DEET in the water?" I said, "Yes, and birth control hormones, and. There are a lot of things that are in our water, and we all play a role in what goes into our water, and we all play a role in making sure these kinds of things can be avoided from going into our water." Thank you.
Dinah, I'm not a lifelong Floridian like you, but you have really meant a lot to me since the time I've been here. And you are just such an incredible resource to everyone that over the years. And you're part of the historical record. And that's really, and what you said about newspapers could not be more true. And we do need to support our newspapers and our environmental reporters. Don't make me cry. So we would like to present you with the Volusia Water Alliance Clay Henderson Award for Environmental Stewardship. And just thank you for everything you've done.